Hello, this is your Child and Adult Care Food Program training for 2025. I'm Sue Merchant and I will be your guide. This training will cover meal pattern, rules, regulations, civil rights, and other updates. There will be 5 codes only visible on screens, and you must write them down on your worksheet. There will be 10 questions, and they are only audible. You must write the answers down on your worksheets. Let's get started.
You received by email a sheet of paper to answer the questions for this training. Fill in all identifying information at the top. You may pause the slide if needed. You must listen to all the slides to hear the 10 questions. You must answer all 10 questions and list all 5 codes. The 10 questions are audio only. You will not see them. They are not in writing. The 5 codes are visible only. You will definitely see them. There are different versions of the codes and questions for a variety of different child care homes. So let's get started. We're going to begin with the rules and regulations of the meal pattern. It is very important that you have a thorough understanding of what you can serve and what you cannot serve. Now let's look at the meal pattern for breakfast. The requirements for breakfast are milk, a fruit or vegetable, and a grain product. However, the new change is that you may substitute the grain product for a meat or meat alternate. For example, you might serve milk, strawberries, and scrambled eggs, or you might serve milk, strawberries, and yogurt. However, you can only make this substitution 3 times per week. You may add grains and meat alternates in the same meal if you wish. That would simply include an extra food. The age categories have not changed, and the quantities required have not changed.
Let's look at breakfast foods. At breakfast, use grains or meat alternates. Meat and meat alternates may be used to substitute the entire grain component a maximum of 3 times per week. Ounce equals ounce, so 1 ounce of grain equals 1 ounce of meat, and vice versa. Your sponsor can provide a list of cereals approved for use in the North Carolina Women and Infants Children's Program. North Carolina WIC approved cereals are healthy choices because they're lower in sugar. They include whole grains, not all of them, but many of them, as the primary ingredient by weight and meet labeling requirements for making FDA health claim as a whole grain food with moderate fat content. And they're higher in iron, at least 28 milligrams of iron per 100 grams of 45% of the USDA adults per 1 ounce dry ounce.
One of the most important new changes in the new meal pattern is that a whole grain must be served and documented on the menu at least once each day. How can you know if a product will count as a whole grain? A whole grain contains all parts of the grain kernel, which includes the bran, germ, and endosperm. When reading the ingredient list, the first word must be whole. This means 50% of the product is whole grain rich. Some types of whole grain are whole wheat, whole corn, brown rice, oats, and barley. Other lesser known but just as healthy for you are quinoa, farro, quinoa, and couscous. There are many more others that are not listed on this page. It is required to serve a whole grain at least once every day. Not all grains are reimbursable products. All grains must be either whole or enriched to count on the CACFP. Unless the first word in the ingredient list says enriched It is not a reimbursable grain at all. They are not credible foods. Meals using non-credible grain items are disallowed. Cornmeal is usually whole grain. However, commercial mixes such as Jiffy Mix or Entenmann's muffins are not reimbursable products. Always check the ingredients when buying cereals, crackers, or grits. It should indicate enriched on the list first to count as a reimbursable grain. Grits must say enriched and are not a whole grain. Things to consider before purchasing a grain for a CACFP meal. These are the things you need to do while you're shopping at the grocery store. Be especially aware of the deception on some packages that say made with whole grain. Only the ingredient list can reveal whether or not there is 50% or more whole grain in the product. Made with does not tell you if it is enough. It may be a very small amount. Pasta products made with bean flours do not count towards the grain requirement at all, ever. Do not use dessert-type grain products such as cakes, pastries, cereal bars, Pop-Tarts, cupcakes, or any other cookie. These are not credible CACFP grains. Meals using these snack-type grains are disallowed. Animal crackers and graham crackers are allowed, but limited to twice in a week. If you go over twice in a week, it will be disallowed. Always read the ingredient list to understand whether or not a product is a whole grain or an enriched product. You must read the ingredient list. It's the only possible way to know. Do not be fooled by the front of a package. So in this case, you see the Ritz crackers. The ingredients list is unbleached, enriched flour first. So it's a reimbursable product, but it is not a whole grain rich food. If it was, the first word would say whole grain, but it does not. However, it's a reimbursable product, but it's not going to count as one of your whole grains, even though on the front of the package it says made with whole grain. Be alert to this. It happens frequently. You're looking for the ingredients and the word whole grain if you're going to use it as a whole grain rich food. It will say whole grain first on the list.
Now we're going to look at the grains chart. You received your copy when you received this training. It's 6 pages long, so open it. We're going to need to scroll down. The chart of the grains shows you that 1 ounce equals 28 grams, half an ounce equals 14 grams. Look carefully at all 6 pages, find the grains that you typically serve, note the amounts you need for half an ounce and for the amount you need for a whole ounce. Always round up. Always serve a 6-year-old and older at least a whole ounce. For example, look at page 3 of your copy, not the one on the screen. How many thin wheats, what we call wheat thins, crackers, do you need to serve a 4-year-old? Look at the column that says 1 to 5-year-olds. Scroll down and you'll see it says 6 crackers equals 11 grams, but you need 14 grams. So if you consider that 6 times 2 equals 12, you're just going to need to round up a little. So each cracker is about 2 grams. So serve at least 7 because you round up. Question 1. How many of the 3-inch rice cakes do you need to serve to equal 14 grams? That would be serving a child 1 to 5. On the page, it's going to tell you 1.5 equals 11 grams. Do you need to serve 2, 3, or 3.5? I'm going to say that again. How many of the 3-inch rice cakes do you need to serve to equal 14 grams? It tells you 1.5 equals 11. So do you need to serve 2, 3, or 4? 3.5 rather. Um, make your selection of, and then ask yourself another question. This isn't on the page, but is it worth it financially when you think what they cost?
This slide has been slightly updated. This is the meal pattern for lunch or supper. It includes milk, meat or meat alternates, fruits and vegetables, and grains. All 4 components must be used at every lunch and supper. Milk for a 1-year-old child must be whole milk. For a child 2 and older must be 1% or skim. Never by 2%, it doesn't count. Meat and meat alternates include quite a variety of foods. We encourage you to use cheeses and dried beans as often as you wish. You must always serve 2 fruits or vegetables at every lunch and supper. They must be they may be frozen, fresh, or canned. We encourage fresh. Always serve 2 different fruits or vegetables. You may not serve 2 fruits. You can serve 2 vegetables and a vegetable or a fruit, but you cannot serve 2 fruits at the lunch or supper meal. Grains may be enriched or whole grains. The way the grain is going to be measured is a little different than it was in the past. The quantity required has not changed, but instead of being measured in, for example, a cup or teaspoons or things like that, it's measured in ounces. So you can see that each child, 1 to 2 or 3 to 5, must have a minimum of half an ounce of whatever grain product you are serving. Any child 6 or older must have 1 ounce. These are the minimums, and we encourage you to serve as much as you know the child needs. We will provide the chart to each of you that shows you the difference. Let's look at the requirements for the meal pattern for a snack. Snack has several components: milk, vegetables, fruits, grains, meat or meat alternates. You must always choose 2 different components. You may choose milk and crackers, then you've covered the milk group and the grain group. You could serve a vegetable and yogurt. That's 2 different groups. These are just samples. The quantities required have not changed, but they are going to be measured if it's a grain in ounces as we mentioned before. You must only serve juice to a child once a day. So it's going to be important to look at your menu, make sure you only have juice once a day or less if possible. Question number 2. How often is a family child care home allowed to serve juice? Once a day, twice a day, or twice a week? I'm going to say that again. How often is a family child care home allowed to serve juice? A, is it once a day? B, twice a day? Or C, twice a week? Now let's talk about serving infants. Infants are babies who are less than 1 year of age. They have their own meal pattern. Infants are fed on demand and do not need to be fed within the required meal times as the 1 year and older children do. All infants must receive iron-fortified formula or breast milk for the first 12 months of life. Infants who are only fed from a bottle and cannot sit up should be held as they are fed. Never prop a bottle. Never serve an infant a fruit juice. It's not credible. Wait until age 1. The foods required are determined by the parent and the provider based on the particular child's needs. It is not recommended to start solid foods prior to 4 months. Most typically start about 5 to 6 months. Be alert to the infant's needs. An infant requires a minimum of 50 to 55 calories for every pound of his or her weight per day. The infant meal pattern changed in 2017. The meal pattern has 2 age divisions, 0 through 5 months and 6 through 11 months. The home must have on site and offer to provide an iron-fortified infant formula if your license says you can have infants in your care. This is true even if you do not have an infant enrolled at the time. The infant feeding consent form must be completed by the parent and kept on file by the sponsor and home for infant meals to be reimbursed. If a mother chooses to breastfeed on site, the provider will be reimbursed also. She must also have the infant feeding consent form on site. Now let's look at a sample of the new meal pattern for breakfast for infants. You can see on the left, birth through 5 months only requires 4 to 6 fluid ounces of breast milk or formula. Though you may start solid foods, it is not a requirement for reimbursement. On the right, you can see the 6 through 11 months has 6 to 8 fluid ounces of breast milk or formula, which is always required. The other components are listed as, for example, 0 to 4 tablespoons of infant cereal. 0 means it is not necessarily required. You might have an infant who is 6 months old who has not yet started solid foods and will start in a few weeks. So it is okay and reimbursable if that child is exclusively still on their breast milk or formula. The other foods listed are also foods that are reimbursable for infants if that infant is developmentally ready to receive those foods. When the child is developmentally ready and begins to start having those foods, they must be consistent and regular from then on.
Be alert to the infant's needs. An infant requires a minimum of 50 to 55 calories for every pound of his or her weight per day. The infant will give you signs when he or she is hungry or has had enough. Infant cereals must be iron fortified infant cereals. These are served once the child is developmentally ready for solid food. Iron fortified cereals are dry cereals only and do not contain other products. You may mix in fruit separately if desired. When using jar food, do not serve directly from the jar, putting the spoon in and out of the jar. It leaves bacteria in the jar. It must be thrown away if you have done this. So if there's food left, you must throw that away. Question 3. If you are feeding a child at lunch and you are feeding the child directly out of the jar, the child falls asleep before you're done. Can I serve the rest of the food that's in that jar to the child at snack later in the day? Yes or no?
Now let's look at some very important reminders for feeding infants. All ages of infants may be reimbursed even if the parents bring the formula or the breast milk. Solid foods are not served prior to 4 months. Cereal should not be mixed into a bottle. Breast milk is recommended. It is the best nutrient source for an infant. On-site breastfeeding is now reimbursed. Infant cereal and formula must be iron fortified and served until the child is 1 year old. A serving of infant cereal, fruit, or vegetable may be optional until the parent believes the child is developmentally ready, typically between 4 and 7 months old. Serving of solid foods may be optional, but once that infant is developmentally ready, it is no longer optional. It is then required on a regular basis. Now we're going to look at some of the rules and regulations for milk standards and meal modifications. Meal modifications have been updated so that you can now count children with something as simple as an allergy as long as you have the medical statement telling the parent what to serve. This is a good change.
The form that you're looking at now is called the Medical Statement for Meal Modifications. Whenever you're receiving a child, make sure you discuss any special eating requirements with the parent for that child. This is the only medical statement that is accepted for the CACFP in the state of North Carolina. It may be filled out by the child's doctor or the dietitian that works with that child. You must put in the institution's name, which is Child Care Resources Incorporated, and the agreement number 7461 at the top. You will put in child adult participation information and the family information. Now, the doctor must put in the section where it says to be completed by licensed healthcare professional. That would be the doctor or a dietitian, a licensed dietitian. It is critical that that licensed dietitian or doctor write in the beverage or the food that must be omitted and must also write in what the child is to have instead of the food that is omitted. If it is left blank, the form is incomplete and is not acceptable. So, for example, if a parent comes to you and says, my child does not drink cow milk, you can offer them all the regular exceptions, such as original silk soy. That's acceptable without a doctor's note. If the parent says, but my child needs to have oat milk, oat milk is not a cow milk product. Therefore, there is only a reimbursable meal if a doctor states that the child should have oat milk instead of cow milk. This is true for any milk product that does not meet the milk equivalency. And it is also true for all other foods that cause the child to not be eating according to the meal pattern. When this situation comes up, call your sponsor and discuss the situation first.
All non-dairy milk substitutes must contain the nutrient equivalent of cow's milk to be reimbursed. No meal modification form is required in this case. However, the non-dairy tool is required to be on file for each child with any milk substitute. Below are two possible soy choices. There are no almond drinks, rice, pea, or flaxseed drinks equivalent to cow's milk. They are not credible unless a doctor has indicated on the medical meal modification form provided by the state of North Carolina that this food or beverage must be served for a medical reason.
Now we're going to take a look at some of the rules and policies that are very important to understand for the food program so that you are always in compliance with your documentation. You must have a completed child enrollment form on file for all children who are present, completed at the parent interview or before the child starts. It must arrive at CCRI within 5 days of enrolling the child. This includes children only visiting for that day. A parent may choose to opt out of the CACFP with a written notice stating the CACFP has been offered, but they choose not to participate in the CACFP. The meals served are not reimbursed. Children may be enrolled from birth to their 13th birthday. See your sponsor for exceptions. Not counting your own school-age children, you may claim only your licensed capacity. If you claim more than your licensed capacity, those meals will be disallowed.
Parents of newly enrolled infants must be offered the food program and must sign the infant feeding consent form as well as the child enrollment form prior to the first day the infant attends the family child care home. You may copy your CACFP manual's pages on infant feeding and give it to parents of infants. You must offer to provide all of the food for the infants in your home. You must offer to provide an iron-fortified infant formula of your choice, but the parent has the right to refuse your offer and provide a different brand or provide breast milk. The formula the provider offers must be presented to the parent and kept on site at all times. You may not charge parents an extra fee for meals, nor ask them to provide food for their children in your family child care home. But the parent, if they wish, may provide one item in a meal. What you're looking at on the screen now is the infant feeding consent form. This form must be given to all parents of children who are not yet 1 year old. There are decisions that the parent must make because you as a child care provider must offer to provide an iron-fortified formula for any child who is not yet 1 year old. You will write the name of that formula next to the second box where it says the facility offers. The parent then may choose what they prefer for their child. They may check the first box which says I will breastfeed my infant on site or provide express breast milk. Or they might choose, I will accept the iron-fortified formula provided by the institution. You will have by this time at the interview presented that formula to the parent. However, the parent could also say, I decline the iron-fortified formula provided by the institution, and then the parent must write in what they are bringing on that line where the third box is. Now, if the child is still within the first 6 months, it might be understood that the child is not having anything other than the beverage, the breast milk or the formula. So they would indicate that by checking the box that says my infant is less than 6 months old. However, obviously the infant will not always be that age, and the parent will need to check the box that says my infant is about 6 months old, but you need to write in the word when. So when you're having a child come to you and that child is less than 6 months, write in the word when under that, so we understand that when that child is old enough to have solid foods at whatever stage that might be, maybe it's 5 months, the child care provider is the one providing that food for the infant. It must be filled in at the bottom also with the infant's name, age, date of birth, and signed by the parent.
Understanding the food program means understanding what you can and cannot serve children. You have to serve children according to the CACFP guidelines in the meal pattern. One of the changes to the meal pattern in 2011 was that children 2 years old and older may only receive 1% or skim milk. Do not add flavoring to milk. Children who are 1 year old always receive whole milk. CACFP homes and centers may not deep fry foods served to children. This was one of the changes October 1st, 2017. These meals would be disallowed. You must record all food served to all children, including all alternatives and substitutes. You may claim reimbursement for meals purchased in restaurants if the meal meets the CACFP guidelines. You should have a receipt for the purchase that reflects the components. You may not ask parents for the payment of any meal served at home or at a restaurant. The minimum milk requirements must be served on the first pour. For example, a 3 to 5-year-old requires 6 ounces. Use cups that hold the complete required serving comfortably. A 6-ounce serving needs to be in an 8 to 9 ounce cup or larger.
All foods recorded on the menu should be specifically named. No general categories should be recorded except for formula on the infant menu. Record IFIF for iron fortified infant formula, IFIC for iron fortified infant cereal. Typically, any WIC approved cereal is not high in sugar, but must be named specifically. In the past, we have always told you that for cereal, you must limit cereal sugars to 6 grams per dry ounce. Going forward, the USDA says we only have to measure added sugars. So let's look at the next slide and see what that means.
Let's look at how to read for added sugars on a nutrition label. If you scroll down to where it says total carbohydrate, it tells you fiber, and then it tells you the total sugars is 12 grams, and that 12 grams includes 10 grams of added sugars. However, at the top it tells you that a serving size is 55 grams. We just learned in the previous slide that 1 ounce is 28 grams. So their serving size here is 2 ounces. So since 1 ounce will then include 5 grams of added sugar, that means that this product, if this is a cereal, is okay for CACFP use because you can't have more than 6 grams of added sugar for cereal. Question 4. When buying a cereal and I'm looking for the amount of sugar, am I going to read for the total sugars or am I going to read for the added sugars? A, total sugars, or B, am I checking for the added sugars? A combination food can count as 3 components of the meal, such as a wrap. A wrap can count as the grain, the meat, and a vegetable. Some foods we don't recommend, such as hot dogs, bologna, chicken nuggets, fish sticks, because you can't tell how much meat is in the item. If you serve these foods, you must provide to your sponsor any CN label or product formulation letter. You get it by reading the 1-800 number on the back of the package. Again, if you serve a commercially mixed meat, you are required to give a copy of the CN label or the product formulation letter to the sponsor. That comes directly from the manufacturer. Without it, you can't know how much meat you've actually served to the children to meet the meal pattern.
Next, we're going to review some of the very important record-keeping requirements and the forms required to keep. There must be a record kept of providers' training. Providers must receive training on rules and regulations and civil rights of the CACFP every program year. Not participating in training could result in termination. Food program records that must be kept for 3 years are monthly meal count forms and menus, DCDEE daily attendance records, child enrollment forms and infant formula breast milk provision forms, sponsor application and agreement, ethnicity racial data forms, and the sponsoring organization Daycare Home review forms. These records must be available at site reviews by CCRI consultants or auditors from the CACFP North Carolina State Office or the USDA. Keep them in your CACFP binder, neat and in order. Maintain 3 records every day: menus, daily meal counts, and DCDEE daily attendance records. Missing records for several days may be cause for a notice of serious deficiency. Always double check your records. Compare attendance for the day with meal counts. Your CACFP monitor will compare them at each review.
Now let's look at information concerning giving us notice, the CACFP sponsor. You must give your CACFP consultant advance notice of serving meals outside of the home. If no child shows up for care, all children left early, you are closed, on field trips, or on vacation. Advance notice means at least the night before for vacations being closed or for breakfast or AM snack. It means 2 hours before the start of any other meal. So you could call us at 8 and say you're going to go out at lunch because lunch doesn't start till 11:30. If you change your address, you may not claim meals until the CACFP has received your license and the state office has approved your new facility. That could take some time and it involves paperwork, so you want to do that with as much advance notice as you can give us. Claim no more than 3 meals a day per child. One meal must be a snack. You can always serve more meals, but you cannot claim more meals. Claim children who live in your home only if you qualify as Tier 1 based on your household income. Only claim your own children's meals when they are served with other enrolled daycare children. If you are claiming a child who actually lives in your home, always call the consultant and ask for the correct paperwork.
Additionally, more important regulations to remember are the following. Provide to CCRI within 5 working days the names of any children added or dropped from enrollment and of any changes to the home's licensing and approval status. Give each parent a Building for the Future flyer and WIC information and post one in your family childcare home. To drop from the CACFP, you must give 10 days advanced written notice to the sponsor. Call your consultant and she will send you the proper form to submit or send an email with specific dates. Call to be sure it was received. Written notice is required because your sponsor has to conduct a certain number of reviews and must know in advance what day you are going to stop providing care. The form on the screen now is a daily attendance record. An attendance record is not a meal count record. This record is the record where you mark all the children who came to your home that day, and this record is also good for your DCDEE attendance. So you do not have to keep 2. There is a place for 8 names of children across the top. Down the left in the first column, you will write in with initials the day of the week. Next to it is the day of the month. And there is a place for a parent to sign in and out the times they arrived and left, and a place next to that where they initial the times that their children came and went. This is a sample of an attendance record that is partially filled in. As you can see at the top, you need to put in the month and the year, and in the left-hand column, you write in the initials of the day of the week. You then make sure that each child's name is first and last name, no nicknames, and the time that the child arrived and the time the child left, referred to as in and out. Where it says parent sign below, that's where the parent puts in their initials. Down in the right-hand corner, it says signature of child care facilities responsible representative. This is where you put in your own signature to validate that you are signing and validating the attendance of the children. Remember, an attendance form is not a meal count. You need both an attendance and a meal count. They should match, and they will always be compared to each other at each site review. The form on the screen now is called the monthly meal count form. This is the form that determines how many meals you will be paid for. In the far left, at the left green arrow, where it says date, those are the days of the month. The next column that says total daily attendance refers to the total number of children who came to your home for care that day. There are 8 places across the top for first and last names and a box for the age of the child. Under the child's name, it has BALPSE. That refers to the types of meals that you might be serving. B, of course, represents breakfast. L represents lunch. There is a key at the bottom that explains this. So for each time the first child was present for breakfast, there will be a B in the column next to the date of the month. At the end of the column at the bottom, the provider will count how many breakfasts were served to that child, and next to the B at the bottom, will write that number in. For example, a typical month, if a child was present every day for breakfast, it might say 20 or 21 breakfasts for that child. You do that for each child. To the far right, there is something called the meal count, and this is where you count across each day. So, for example, if 5 children attended breakfast, under the B you will have a 5 each day. If the next day only 3 children were present for breakfast, you would have a 3 under the B, and so on for each meal. In the far right column at the bottom where it says Tier 1 and Tier 2, you disregard that. That is only used by your sponsor. This form needs to be filled out every day. At the top, it'll have the month and the year and the provider's name. The provider's name is not the name of the home, it's the name of the person.
On this screen, you can see 5 days worth of menus for breakfast, lunch, and snack. There are 2 errors on this menu that will cause disallowances. Please write down what those errors are. This is question 5. Write down what the 2 errors are that you see in this 5 days worth of menus. Error number 1 and error number 2.
If you don't want to use all that paper, you have an option. All home providers may choose to record online using the KidCare software produced by Minute Menu. It is free to each home provider. This would take the place of the paper menu and meal count forms you just viewed. However, you may use both, recording on paper first and then record and submit online when it's convenient, or you may skip paper recording and use KidCare Daily as your only CACFP record-keeping system. To the left, you can see a help page where you can view many training videos. Your sponsor will get you started and walk you through it. If you're interested, call your sponsor and get started on KidCare. It will save you a great deal of time.
The screen you're looking at now is a page from KidCare. This is the page where you would record attendance. As you can see, there's a list of words to the left that's called a menu, and you could choose any of those. And what you would do to record attendance is you would see any one of the names, you simply click on it and it will say in. You click on it again and it will say out. You will be doing the same thing for the same list of names when you record whether the child is present at each meal. It's very, very simple. We hope you used KidCare to save yourself time.
Now we're going to look at the CACFP reimbursement review and the claim submission. In other words, how do you actually get the money?
In order to receive your CACFP reimbursement, you must file a claim. You must file this claim each month on time. All claims are due on the 4th of the month following the claim month. Claims that arrive after the 4th through the end of the month will be paid a month later. All forms must be signed and dated. Providers who submit their claim online before 11 p.m. on the 2nd will be paid first. Late claims must be received during the current claim month. Do not wait until the end of the month. All funds are sent by direct deposit. If a provider believes that there is an error in her reimbursement, she must notify her consultant within 10 days of receiving the bank deposit. There is a limited amount of time that the sponsor has to actually correct those errors. Only meals that have a menu which meets the CACFP meal pattern guidelines will be reimbursed. Also, a meal count must be recorded for each meal per child per age.
Let's look at a few more regulations. Only meals that have been approved and are served during the approved meal time on the provider's application will be reimbursed. You must call in the change to your sponsor before you serve outside your approved meal time. You can serve outside that time only if you've told the sponsor in advance. You will lose reimbursement for a meal if your CACFP consultant arrives during your approved meal time and you're not home and you've not notified the consultant in advance. Letting the consultant know you are not serving meals at home is also possibly a reason for a notice of serious deficiency if that were a repeat behavior. The monthly meal count form, daily menu record form, and the DCD daily attendance records must be recorded daily and available at a review on site. Not recording daily is cause to receive a notice of serious deficiency also, if that is a repeat behavior. There is never an exception to recording daily or having the records on site. Question 6. What two things could happen if you do not keep your records and you do not tell us that you are not going to be home during an approved mealtime? Again, let me say that another way. What two consequences could happen to the provider if she does not tell us she's not going to be home during her approved mealtime, or if she has not been keeping the records daily? Only meals served to children with current child enrollment forms on file in the CCRI office will be reimbursed. If you submit online, look for P or A, pending or active, in the record meal screen. The form is good for 1 year. Only meals served to infants with both current child enrollment forms and infant feeding consent forms will be reimbursed. Make sure the parent marks the applicable sections on the infant consent form. A provider's income eligibility application to be a Tier 1 home based on household income must include documentation to support the income listed unless the home is also Tier 1 based on its school assignment. You or a parent may apply any time of year to have your tier changed. We're going to talk more about tiers in the next slide.
Enrolled children's eligibility application to receive reimbursement at the Tier 1 rate in a Tier 2 mixed family child care home must be completely filled out and signed by the parent. This form is confidential and is not available to the provider. It expires after 1 year. Monthly meal counts must be recorded after the meal is served, either on paper or online daily. You may record a menu in advance, but not the child's attendance at the meal. Meal attendance may not be recorded until it is served. If for any reason you cannot record online, such as your internet went down, you must create and save a paper record. Minute Menu provides one within the system with all the names of the children listed. When you record on paper, you must record a menu for each snack, morning, AM, afternoon, PM, or evening, EVE, or indicate that all snacks each day are the same by circling the time of day. Online, it is necessary to have a snack recorded also for each separate meal.
You have heard me talking about a letter of serious deficiency, but what is a letter of serious deficiency? If a provider is not in compliance with the CACFP agreement, the sponsor will retrain the provider another time. If the provider does not correct the deficiency after extra training has been provided, a letter of serious deficiency will be sent. The letter will require a corrective action. It is at this point and this point only the provider can change procedures and correct the issue. If the corrective action is complete and permanent, the letter of serious deficiency will be temporarily rescinded. If the error occurs again, the provider may receive a letter of proposed termination. The provider has the right to appeal the proposed termination. If the sponsor has not fulfilled the CACFP agreement properly, the provider may win the appeal. The appeal of a proposed termination is to show that the sponsor has not followed the rules of the CACFP agreement. It is not the time to say, give me a second chance. You get a second chance when you have received a letter of serious deficiency and you are correcting it at that point. Below are 7 reasons for a letter of serious deficiency. Submission of false information on the application. That's the application when you first signed up for the food program. Submission of false claims for reimbursement. That would be putting in information when you file your claim that is not true. Simultaneous participation under more than one sponsoring organization. Non-compliance with the program meal pattern. That's not serving what you're saying is on your menu or not turning in correct menus. Failure to keep required records. That's not recording daily. Conduct or conditions that threaten the health or safety of a child in care or the public health or safety. A determination that the daycare home has been convicted of any activity that occurred during the past 7 years and that indicated a lack of business integrity. List a reason for receiving a letter of serious deficiency. This is question 7. List one reason a provider may receive a letter of serious deficiency. That's question 7. Just write it out.
If the provider has received a letter of serious deficiency, she must do these 3 things, or she could get proposed termination. A proposed termination is the next step before a provider may be terminated. These 3 things are to read it very carefully, complete the corrective action on time, and to keep the corrective action permanently in place. A provider may not get a serious deficiency for the same problem that occurred before because she has to keep the corrective action in place. Question 8. Which of these is true? If a provider gets a serious deficiency letter, she should do which of these? A, read it carefully. B, complete the corrective action on time. C, keep the corrective action permanently in place. Or D, all of the above. Let me repeat that. If a provider receives a serious deficiency letter, she must do which of these? Read it very carefully, complete the corrective action on time, and keep the corrective action in place. Or D, do all of those.
Now we're going to briefly go through some safety and sanitation issues. We're not going to read them all, but we're going to skip through them so that you have some exposure, and these things you can read on your own at another time also. You can post them, and they're also included in your CACFP manual. Let's briefly look at temperatures that need to be considered in the kitchen. For example, your refrigerator temperature should always be at 40 or slightly below. The temperature to which you need to cook poultry is 170, but the temperature for ground meat is 160. It is very important that you understand that between the temperatures of 40 and 140, this is the danger zone where bacteria can quickly multiply. So if your refrigerator was sitting, say, for example, at 50 degrees, you need to reconsider what happened to the dairy products if a long time lapsed. This is something that you need to look for. So check your thermometer on a regular basis that is kept in your refrigerator at all times. Knowing and understanding and being alert to things such as how thoroughly should you and children wash their hands, how long can food be sitting out when it is not refrigerated, are listed in this slide. For example, according to your licensing regulations, you know that you must wash your hands for 20 seconds, and a baby bottle should be warmed in hot water for about 5 minutes. If food is sitting out, it should be thrown out after 2 hours. If you have an open baby food jar, that jar cannot be used after 24 hours after it has been opened. If you put the spoon in and out of the jar, you cannot reuse it at all. If food or milk has an expiration date that is passed, throw it out. It is always better to be safe. When you look at the measurements that are on the screen, it says, for example, cool cooked foods in the refrigerator in layers less than 3 inches. If you have cooked a food that is a very thick food, such as lasagna or a casserole, it takes a long time to cool that food down if it's actually hot. And you know, based on your licensing regulations, that you must sanitize the tables before using them at each meal, and that the rooms the children use, such as bathrooms or the diapering areas, must be cleaned with the required chlorine solution at all times. This should be done regularly. Now we've come to the section on civil rights. As you know, all child care providers receiving funds from the federal or state government are required to have training on civil rights for themselves and for their participants on a yearly basis. This section will fulfill that requirement for the Child and Adult Care Food Program.
Let's look at three important aspects of civil rights. You must serve meals to all enrolled children without regard to race, color, national origin, sex, or disability or age. You must collect ethnic racial data on each child and provide the data to the sponsor. You must keep ethnic racial data forms in a secure place. This is confidential information. Question 9. If a child care provider decides that she does not want to put a child on the food program because the child has not turned 1 year old yet. It involves the infant forms, and the parent is very dubious about what they're going to be bringing. So the provider decides it's quite a bit of trouble. I'll wait till the child turns 1. Is that an act of discrimination, yes or no? If so, which one of the classes has been violated? What is discrimination? The act of distinguishing one person or groups of persons from others, either intentionally, by neglect, or by the effect of actions or lack of actions based on their protected classes. Protected classes in the CACFP are race, color, sex, age, disability, and national origin. Very recently, in July of 2025, the USDA has announced that the word sex does not include gender identity, and they will be rewriting the form that needs to be posted and kept on file, but it has not been printed yet. We will get them to you when they come out.
Now let's look at the areas of civil rights compliance in the CACFP. We will briefly discuss each area in the following slides. First, your obligation is a collection and use of data, as we just explained. Second, you must have an effective public notification system. You must have compliant procedures, compliance reviews, resolution of noncompliance, requirements for reasonable accommodation of persons with disabilities, requirements for language assistance, equal opportunity for religious organizations, conflict resolution, and customer service. Let's look very carefully at collection and use of data because the USDA changed the rules this year for how you collect the data for race and ethnicity. Collection and use of data is solely for the purpose of determining the state's compliance with federal civil rights laws. It can be collected by self-identification and self-reporting. It cannot be collected by visual identification by the child care provider. That means you used to have a poster, and at the top of the poster it said, please post. And it described to parents that if they did not give you the information, you were going to check it off on the enrollment form or the income form. You, as the provider, can no longer do that. The parent can just leave it blank, and you would just put in that it was not provided. Data collected must be on file and maintained for 3 years. Data collected must be restricted to authorized personnel only. Ethnic categories are Hispanic or Latino and not Hispanic or Latino. Racial categories are American, Indian, or Alaska Native, Asian, Black or African American, Native Hawaiian, or other Pacific Islander, and white. The next question 10. Question 10. If the parent does not give you the ethnic racial data for their child, can you, as the provider, check it off yourself? Yes or no? Let me say that again. If the parent of the child does not provide the ethnic racial data, can you, as the child care provider, do a visual observation and check it off yourself? Yes or no? Let's look at public notification. Public notification has 3 basic elements. 1, program availability, complaint information, and non-discrimination statement. Program availability must inform applicants, participants, and potentially eligible persons of their program rights and responsibilities and the steps necessary for participation. Complaint information must be advised at the service delivery point of their right to file a complaint, how to file a complaint, and the complaint procedures.
Non-discrimination statement. This must be included on materials, sources, and websites if these sources are used to inform the public about the CACFP. Non-discrimination statement and filing a complaint in accordance with federal law and U.S. Department of Agriculture policy. This institution is prohibited from discriminating on the basis of race, color, national origin, sex, age, or disability. And you have the address that is provided. Let's look at the required discrimination complaint form. The required discrimination complaint form is kept in your CACFP binder. The provider must give it to the individual wanting to file the complaint form. Complaints of discrimination may be made by any person alleging discrimination based on the 6 classes we've spoken about before: race, color, national origin, sex, age, or disability. It must be made within 180 days of the alleged discriminatory action. The following information should be included in the civil rights complaint. And then there is a paragraph telling you what's on the complaint form. So if you have a child care parent who says you have discriminated against me, you open your binder and give them the form and welcome them to file the complaint. That is their right and that is your obligation. You must have that form available at all times. It is checked off at every review and it must be available to be seen in your binder. Now let's look at compliance reviews and non-compliance. Compliance reviews must be conducted by state agencies on participating institutions and facilities in order to determine the Title VI compliance and to evaluate the effect of those procedures on program applicants and participants. Noncompliance is a factual finding that any civil rights requirement as provided by law, regulation, policy, instruction, or guidelines is not being adhered to by a state agency, a local agency, or a subrecipient. A subrecipient would be a family child care home or a center. At that point, the steps are taken to bring that home or center into compliance, and if they do not come into compliance, eventually they will be given a warning, a serious deficiency, and they could be terminated.
Three more considerations concerning civil rights is the requirement for reasonable accommodations for persons with disabilities, requirements for language assistance, and equal opportunity for religious organizations. There are some religious organizations who have food restrictions that may change the meal pattern, and the federal government gives accommodations to these facilities. It is not an accommodation for an individual, but for a facility as a whole. The last two subjects of compliance in the civil rights section are conflict resolution and customer service. Conflict resolution comes about from differences in needs, values, and motivations. Conflict is not a problem in itself, it's what we do with it that counts. Customer services are an integral part of civil rights in the business community. Serving the community that you live in equally and fairly is the basis for the Civil Rights Restoration Act of 1987 and the Civil Rights Act of 1964. See the website included here on the slide if you want tips on how to handle this. You may also call the training department at Child Care Resources and speak to a professional trainer. These are usually addressed when you write your policies for your child care facility.
You're done. You did a great job. After you answer all questions and codes, add the date and time to the answer sheet. This is important in order for us to send you a correct certificate. Send your answer sheet and the evaluation sheet back to CCRI. If we need to contact you about your answers, we will call you. Email the answer sheet and the evaluation to Ebony. The email is below. You will receive a credit certificate in the mail by mid-September. You will receive a copy of the certificate for your CACFP binder. You'll also receive the original with the embossment that's on it in the lower left. Place that in the binder that you give to your DCDEE licensing consultant. She needs to be able to verify it with that embossment. Thank you. It's been a great time.